Ken Caldeira, let's have you explain what is geoengineering. Give us a brief explanation of this is a very abstract concept. How do you describe it?
There are two main categories of geoengineering. If we think about the global warming that humans are producing, it's primarily due to the fossil fuel CO2 that we're adding to the atmosphere. And this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere makes it more difficult for heat to escape to space. And so one approach, which is relatively non-controversial, is to just remove some of the carbon dioxide that we're adding to the atmosphere. But if we think about what's heating the Earth up to begin with, it's the sunlight hitting the Earth, and we're absorbing this solar radiation. And so another way to cool off the Earth would be to reflect some of that incoming sunlight back to space. And this is precisely what volcanoes do, and the Earth has cooled after each of the large volcanoes that have occurred over the last 50 years or so. And so the other leading idea is basically to emulate what big volcanoes do, put material in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight. And there's a few other ideas as well, but they're all based on the same idea of reflecting sunlight back to space.
Kim Stanley Robinson, is that comprehensive enough, the idea of either sucking carbon out of the sky or bouncing heat back toward the sun?
Well, I think that the common understanding of this term geoengineering has morphed fairly quickly to the notion that it would be a technological silver bullet, where you could do one thing and solve the problem of us burning fossil fuels. So people immediately object to it as a kind of a moral hazard, that if we think that we can get away with it, that we won't decarbonize fast enough. And then also there's a certain resistance to the technocratic in general of taking over of the not just world history, but even planetary ecosystems themselves by some poorly defined technological elite with a method in mind. And so many things have gone wrong in the human interventions in this planet before that people distrusted on several levels. So it's getting attacked almost immediately for things that are not quite right or true. And yet there's reasons why these attacks have come about. For instance, people will say, well, you put something up in the atmosphere and then we're going to accidentally cause an ice age. And there's not an understanding that, like volcanic explosions, that dust goes into the atmosphere. For 5 years it's cooler, then it falls down to the ground. So in a way, this is kind of an experiment that we could run that has a natural terminus to it. So it's a little bit safer than other things that might be suggested. So yeah, it's gotten complicated. I always try to say, well, geoengineering, if we plant a lot of forests, if we give all the women on the planet their full legal rights, we've changed the climate of the Earth in a radical way. So that's geoengineering too. And this kind of blows the discussion apart, and I'm not sure that's where we want to go tonight. But I think it's important to point out that we're talking about humanity's relationship to the biosphere and the planet as a complex system that we can't hack, that's not the right word, but we might be able to finesse it in ways that will keep us from causing a mass extinction event. So we need to talk about it, but it can quickly get scary in several different ways.
Yeah, I don't particularly like the hack metaphor, but one thing that you were saying I can't emphasize enough. The idea that there is, in some minds, and I think in some of the popular conception of geoengineering, that it's necessarily an alternative to reducing fossil fuel emissions is pernicious and wrong. There is no gap. There's no iron law that says you have to have one or the other. You can quite easily imagine worlds where you have both and there is this idea of moral hazard, this idea that if you have geoengineering, moral hazard being the idea that if you're insured against risk or in some other way immune to risk, you will be riskier.